The Favorite. The last two movies from director Yourgous Lanthimous were good, I think. They were certainly very polarizing. Intriguing, but polarizing. I listened to an interview with Yourgous Lanthimous a couple months ago where he said that while he obviously hopes people like his movies, he also hopes some people hate his movies. The thought being that people are so different, if you make something everyone likes, it might be too middle of the road. Fair enough, I guess. I hope he's not too broken up about the fact that everyone seems to love his newest movie, The Favorite, because I would argue it's not because it's middle of the road, but because it's outstanding. The Favorite is Lanthimous' first movie for which he didn't also write the screenplay, which might be why it's less polarizing. It was originally written by Deborah Davis 20-something years ago, and it sat around for decades, ostensibly because financiers didn't believe there was a market for a movie with lesbian scenes and no substantive male characters. The 90s were a different time. The script was eventually brought to Lanthimous, and even though he doesn't have a screenplay credit, he still brings enough of his personal touch that it still feels nice and Lanthimous-y, from the acerbic wit to the occasional fun absurdity, whether it be a palace duck race or a naked portly gentleman in a powdered wig holding his junk while lords throw pomegranates at him for sport. Both lovingly shot in slow motion. Not unlike Phantom Thread last year, it was necessary for me to see The Favorite twice because it took me a viewing to really get what the movie was. Pared down to its most basic form, it's a power struggle / pseudo-love triangle between three women. Queen Anne of England, played by Olivia Coulman, her trusted advisor Sarah, the Duchess of Marlborough, played by Rachel Weisz, and Sarah's cousin Abigail, played by Emma Stone. The story begins in the early 1700s in the midst of the War of Spanish Succession, pitting England against France. And it's immediately clear that Queen Anne is a less than capable leader.
Mrs. Morley, we are at war.
We won!
Oh, it is not over. We must continue.
Oh, I did not know that.
And that Sarah is making all the wartime decisions behind the scenes, taking advantage of the blubbering queen's confidence to more or less run the country by proxy. Abigail's family has fallen on hard times, so she comes to the palace hoping that her cousin Sarah can give her work.
I hoped I might be employed here by you. As something.
A monster for the children to play with, perhaps.
Yes, if you like.
After suffering as a downstairs maid for a spell, Abigail's charm and resourcefulness work her into the queen's favor, much to the chagrin of Sarah. The plot mostly consists of Sarah and Abigail trying to outmaneuver each other in increasingly diabolical ways in order to become or remain the eponymous favorite of Queen Anne. And it's so entertaining to watch them do that because of how smart both women are, how ruthless they both are, and because, given the setting, they have to do it all with a smile on their face to keep up appearances. Remember that scene in Bridesmaids when Kristen Wiig and Rose Byrne are both giving toasts at Maya Rudolph's engagement party and they keep trying to one-up each other? Picture that, but for an entire movie, and with way higher stakes. But there's also a ton more going on than just two women feuding for attention. Lanthimous said that what originally drew him to the project was the idea of three women making decisions that affected the lives of literally millions of people. They're running a country at war, after all. And all three are, troublingly, largely watching out for their own interests and little else. Abigail and Sarah supposedly have the Queen's best interests at heart, but to varying degrees and often only to the extent that it benefits them. The Favorite has a fair amount in common with its fellow Best Picture nominee Vice, in that both movies show that proximity to power is power. And yet The Favorite largely ignores the politics of the time. Yeah, there are some scenes vaguely discussing battle strategies and taxation, but that stuff mostly just exists as a backdrop for Sarah's and Abigail's scheming. And yeah, it's a period piece, but as Tatiana Siegel wrote in The Hollywood Reporter, this ain't your mother's costume drama. Like the politics, the movie mostly uses its period setting as a backdrop. Yeah, there are gaudy costumes and powdered wigs and some incredible production design, but no one speaks in a period dialect. The costumes are actually more modern than is period appropriate.
Black and white leather, denim, and things that are very anachronistic.
And there's a hilarious, shamelessly modern GIF-worthy dance sequence. It's also very stylistically shot, with a constantly moving camera, super wide-angle lenses, and plenty of low angles to both show off the high palace ceilings and isolate the characters in the massive space. The one way the period setting does come into play is in the fact that the main characters are women in the 18th century, where their quality of life was inextricably tied to their social status, but they didn't have many means of changing their social status except through associating themselves with powerful people, either through marriage or through befriending the queen, as the case may be. Thus, the movie is also about rising and falling along the socioeconomic ladder, but crucially from the perspective of women.
Favor is a breeze that shifts direction all the time. Then, in an instant, you're back sleeping with a bunch of scabrous whores.
Abigail begins the film stuffed in a carriage sitting across from a dude masturbating before being pushed into shit, and she ends up sleeping in the queen's bed. Sarah begins the film as the queen's one confidant. In the opening scene, the queen has just given a speech and waits silently for the room to clear so she can ask Sarah how she did.
How was my speech?
You were brilliant.
And by the end of the movie, Sarah ends up in unseemly places. There are 3 interstitial scenes of Sarah and Abigail shooting that acts as a 3-act play of sorts, tracking their shifting power dynamic. In the first one, Abigail is a terrible shot and Sarah is a great shot, and Sarah says on-the-nose things like, "I'll make a killer of you yet."
Take your shot.
In the second one, Sarah senses that Abigail is an impending threat, so she asserts her dominance and vaguely threatens her.
Sometimes it is hard to remember whether you have loaded the pellet or not. I do fear confusion and accidents.
And by the third shooting scene, Abigail is by now a great shot, and she says on-the-nose things like, "You've taught me well." Through the rise and fall of the characters, it's amazing how much your sympathies shift. The audience is really positioned to side with Abigail at the start of the movie, given her lowly starting point and Sarah's cruel honesty.
You look like a badger. Oh. Are you going to cry? Really? Well, what do you think you look like? Badger.
And while Sarah is cunning and a bit of a bitch to just about everyone, she does seem to genuinely care about the queen, more so than Abigail at least. While Sarah exhibits a tough love approach with the queen, Abigail is much softer and more complimentary, and more meets the queen where she's at, in a sense. But as Justin Chang of the LA Times points out, the movie's most troubling insight may be that cruelty and compassion are often interchangeable bedfellows. Sarah's approach may be cruel, but it's coming from a place of compassion.
And I heard the word fat, and ugly.
No one but me would dare, and I did not.
Abigail's approach may be compassionate, but it's coming from a place of doing anything to get her way.
I must take control of my circumstance.
I'm on my side. Always.
In the middle of all this is Queen Anne, who is often incredibly off-putting. She's childlike, sickly, and very manic.
Did you just look at me? Did you? Look at me! Look at me! How dare you! Close your eyes!
And yet she's rarely unsympathetic, mostly because she just wants to be loved. Queen Anne keeps a horde of rabbits in her bedroom, and pay attention to how Sarah and Abigail treat those rabbits. They're used as a clever barometer for how sympathetic a given character is. It's probably my favorite screenplay of the year. Every character voice is distinct, it's really funny, it's interesting, it's well structured, and I love that the movie appears on its face to be exactly the kind of movie I usually avoid, i.e. a gaudy costume drama. But that's a misdirect. In those movies, the hook is the setting and the aesthetic, often at the expense of the characters. The Favorite is the opposite. It has 3 fully formed, flawed, dastardly, cunning women who are allowed to display a full spectrum of human characteristics, from conniving to compassionate, from sexy to disgusting. And just from a pure entertainment/enjoyment level, of all the Best Picture nominees, it's probably my favorite.
This is madness.
Sometimes a lady likes to have some fun.